International Migration Organization stresses warring parties should respect international law and protect civilians. In World Human Rights Day, war-torn Yemen suffer from endless humanitarian crimes. A new U.S. study confirms that the recent military escalation in Yemen undermines peace efforts. Welcome to Yemen Today TV. This is the English news with me, Roshan Fouad. Starting from Ma'rib, the UN Migration Agency called on all parties to respect international humanitarian law and protect civilian lives, stressing that civilians should never be a target. For its part, Ministry of Human Rights called on international community to protect civilians in Ma'rib and to take punitive measures against Houthi militia. This came after Houthis' attack on Al Hama displaced camp that resulted in injuring 6 children and 1 woman. In line with the World International Humanitarian Rights Day, the European Union condemned violations and abuses of human rights in Yemen. In a statement, the European Union calls on all parties to stop all human rights violations, stressing that Yemenis deserve lasting peace and respect of their rights at all times. While the world celebrates December 10th as the International Day for Human Rights, Yemenis are subjected to the Houthi deadly machine on a daily basis. Political opponents, journalists, women, and children are all targets of Houthi killing, kidnapping, torture, and sentencing. More details on this story are within the following report.
The 10th of December marks the International Day of Human Rights. With another year passing and unfortunately, the human rights situation across Yemen has only worsened. Despite all the work being done by the international human rights organizations, more people are being targeted for their legitimate and peaceful human rights activities or expressing opinions or calling for basic human rights. Yemen is suffering for the 7th year under war and conflict that has left behind the tragedies and horrific violations of human rights. And despite the international movement to stop the war, the chances of peace are still slim. The protracted conflict has had a devastating impact on civilians across the country. Civilians suffer from destroyed critical infrastructure, including schools and hospitals, lack of fuel and lack of basic services. 6 years into an armed conflict that has killed and injured over 19,000 civilians, while Yemen remains the largest humanitarian crisis in the world, experiencing the world's worst food security crisis with more than 20 million people, nearly 2/3 of the population requiring food assistance. Roughly 80% of Yemen's population required humanitarian aid. However, Houthis block those aids and severely restricting their delivery to desperately needed people, including over 12 million children. UNICEF warned that the number of children under the age of 5 who suffer from acute malnutrition could rise to 2.4 million. 7.8 million children had no access to education following COVID-19 related school closures, and nearly 10 million did not have adequate access to water and sanitation. Houthi forces recruited children to fight with them also in the battlefronts. The warring parties continued committing violations against journalists and media professionals and restricted freedom of movement and subjected civilians to additional arbitrary restrictions that deepened their suffering. While the world celebrates the International Human Rights Day, Yemenis celebrate another year of devastation, destruction, division, horrific violations, and deepening social rifts which have created the most severe man-made humanitarian disaster, undermining Yemenis' ability to live in flagrant disregard of the basic rules of international law and humanitarian standards.
The United Nations said there are an estimated 6.1 million women in Yemen who are in dire need of protection services. According to a study made by the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, conflict has exacerbated the already dire situation with regard to the protection of women and girls and their rights, noting that protection needs were more severe for displaced women and girls. The study said that the collapse of the public institutions and informal protection mechanisms led to a scarcity of support services for women and girls and public services, adding that emergency cash support for basic protection is almost non-existent. The Samaritan announced the distribution of emergency kits to 200 displaced families from Al Juba. According to a statement, the distribution items included food basket for mosquito nets, 2 tarps, a basic hygiene kit, plus towels, washing basins, plastic jugs, and chlorine tablets. The United Nations has announced the arrival of 20,000 African migrants to Yemen since the beginning of 2021. The International Organization for Migration said in a statement that 1 out of every 5 migrants who took the road to Yemen are women and girls. The statement said that these migrants are exposed to great risks during their journey, as many of them are held against their will. The organization added that newly arrived migrants are the most vulnerable because they do not know where to go for help. Tata's local authority in Mawza'a took over the health center located in Makha Junction after its rehabilitation and restoration by the joint forces. The rehabilitated and restored health center consists of an emergency room, 2 rooms in the inpatient department, a laboratory department, a pharmacy, a storeroom, and a guard room. Mawza'a Director Abdul Karim said that this will help thousands of citizens and displaced people in the area who used to travel great distances to reach health centers. In the West Coast, joint forces and coalition inflicted heavy losses among the Houthi militia. Military sources reported that the militia received heavy blows in clashes and artillery bombardment of the outskirts of Maqbana, El Jarrahi, and Jabal Ras. Sources said that Houthis were inflicted with heavy losses in terms of lives and equipment. To Shabwa, government forces carried out an ambush for Houthi militants, inflicting heavy losses among them in Mayhan in the Nask front. Military sources said that the ambush resulted in the killing of at least 13 Houthi elements and destroying 2 military vehicles. Sources added that government forces advanced further 4 kilometers and liberated a number of areas from Houthi control in Bayhan. Turning to El Jawf, government forces thwarted the Houthi attack in Al Alam front east of Al Hazn. According to sources, government forces inflicting heavy losses among the rebels and burned an armored vehicle. Sources added that government forces recovered military vehicles, including a BMP vehicle, and captured a group of militia members while the rest of their fighters fled. To Ma'rib, the fighting in the city doubled losses of the rebels after spending 3 days to make any breakthrough. Sources reported that the militia had received hundreds of wounded and dead after mobilizing thousands of equipments and missiles to penetrate one of the city's most important defensive sites. The sources added that the Houthi militia had received painful blows and heavy human and material losses during the past 2 days, noting that the artillery of the army and coalition aircraft destroyed a number of vehicles in Al Rawdat Jahm front, south of the province. A recent U.S. study found out that the recent military escalation by the warring parties in Yemen seems to have ruined the political process in the country and undermined all peace efforts. More in-depth insight into the findings of this study is within the following report.
In the last 2 weeks, political violence in Yemen increased significantly in different areas across the country. A study by Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project indicated. Violence has escalated over the last months despite efforts by the United States and the United Nations to engineer a ceasefire in the 7-year-old war that has caused a dire humanitarian crisis. In Hodeidah Governorate, intense clashes between Houthi and joint forces continued, recording 2 weeks of dramatic escalation. In Marib Governorate, clashes increased last week. It is the third consecutive week in which Houthi forces did not register territorial gains. Also, reports have emerged over the past 2 weeks of Houthi forces abducting and killing tribal leaders, refusing to send fighters to the front lines. In Shabwa, government forces opened a new front against Houthi forces in Ain district last week, after an absence of more than 2 months, leading to the cutoff of the Shabwa-Marib road. This contributed to a 471% spike in violence last week, relative to the past month in the governorate. Meanwhile, coalition airstrikes on Sana'a city and neighboring districts continued last week, destroying several Houthi sites for assembling and launching drones and ballistic missiles. This is the 4th consecutive week which the Yemeni capital was targeted by coalition airstrikes, something that had not been recorded by the project since June 2019. The study reported that this contributed to a 135% spike in violence last week, relative to the past month after a spike of the previous week of 300%. Houthis, on the other hand, increased their attacks on Saudi land. Coalition said one ballistic missile was intercepted over Riyadh, where residents reported loud blasts, and destroyed 2 armed drones launched from Yemen towards the kingdom. In turn, the coalition bombed military targets in Sana'a. Despite the continuous calls from the UN envoy to de-escalate, the tit-for-tat violence has escalated dramatically over the last months, causing a complete stalemate in efforts to engineer a ceasefire agreement.
Coming next. Yemen's rich cultural heritage is at risk in the time of war.
راتب الواحد 120 ألف، والكيس الدقيق ب18 ألف، والكيس السكر اليوم ب20 ألف. كم يعني بيعطي هذا الراتب كامل كيس سكر وكيس دقيق؟
المواطن اليمني يعيش في أزمة إنسانية وغذائية مؤلمة من غلاء الأسعار وفحشة الأسعار وغلاء الصرف والعملة الأجنبية في البلد.
حالتي الحين حالة، لما أخرج لما ندير إحنا شلقيلة ما نقدرش ناكل الأكل داخل، ما إحنا بحاجة صعبة.
Welcome back. The United Nations Security Council is expected to hold an open session next Tuesday, December 14, to discuss developments in Yemen. UN envoy Hans Grunberg is expected to brief the Council on results of his recent consultations with international and regional actors on Yemen and what he has received over 100 days since his appointment as US envoy to Yemen. Iran has increased its backing for the Houthis to kill Yemenis and expand the conflict to neighboring countries. A recent study has found out that Iranians smuggle arms to Houthis through Somalia. The following report has more details on this.
Guns supplied by Iran to its Houthi allies in Yemen are being smuggled across the Gulf of Aden to Somalia by arms dealers, according to a Geneva think tank. The Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime said in study drew on data from more than 400 weapons documented in 13 locations across Somalia. It is the first publicly available research into the scale of illicit arms smuggling from Yemen into the Horn of Africa country. Weapons originating in the Iran-Yemen arms trade are being trafficked onward into Somalia itself, the study said. Iran has repeatedly denied any involvement in the trafficking of arms to the Houthis. However, A preponderance of evidence points to Iranian state supply. Iran's foreign ministry and a spokesman for Yemen's Houthi forces did not respond to a request for comment on the study. Iran has repeatedly denied any involvement in the trafficking of arms to its Houthi allies in Yemen, where the 6-year civil war has killed tens of thousands of Yemenis. According to the study, the investigators were not able to fully document the buyers and sellers of the weapons. While its focus was on illegal arms dealings involving Iranian-made weapons, the issue was transnational, and weapons originating in the US and other countries had also been diverted to illicit markets. The Iranian involvement with Houthi rebels is quite clear and has been repeatedly expressed by top Iranian officials. Whether that involvement needs further probe in order to unveil it, it seems like confirming what is already confirmed.
To economy, experts propose solutions for the newly Central Bank Board of Directors, with the aim of achieving rapid progress in stabilizing the national currency. Experts call to start talks with Central Bank in Sana'a through international sponsorship to discuss all issues related to monetary policy, supervise banks and money changers, and try to reach understandings to end the continuation of the current division. In Aden, a meeting chaired by the Deputy Governor of the Central Bank of Yemen, Dr. Mohammed Benaja, discussed requirements to face current economic situation. Benaja highlighted the importance of adhering to the applicable regulations and laws in order to achieve the planned goals within the annual work plan of the Central Bank and to assess the level of achievement during this year. Yemen has a unique architectural legacy which is being damaged and destroyed by warfare or left to fall into ruin by neglect. 3 of the 52 World Heritage Sites listed by the UNESCO as in danger are in Yemen. The following report has more details on this.
The poorest country in this region, Yemen, has a unique architectural legacy which is being damaged and destroyed by warfare or left to fall into ruin by neglect. 3 of the 52 World Heritage Sites listed by the cultural organization UNESCO as in danger are in Yemen. Sana'a's old city and its 7th century Great Mosque, regarded as the first to be built outside Mecca, and Medina, the walled city of Shibam and the historic town of Zabid. Historic buildings have been damaged by fighting and bombing in the old city of Sana'a, which has been inhabited for more than 2,500 years and is ranked as one of the oldest cities in the world, along with Damascus and Aleppo. Sana'a's multicolored blocks, built before the 11th century, are constructed of rammed earth and decorated with white geometric designs. The city boasts 6,000 of these houses and 103 mosques. Among them is the Great Mosque, which is dated to the time of Prophet Muhammad and was a center for the propagation of Islam. Shibam is famed for its 500 magnificent mud brick high-rise buildings which, although the city has been settled for 1,700 years, were constructed in the 16th century. These apartment blocks require constant maintenance to protect their walls from being eroded by wind and rain. Zabid's buildings, some 2 or 3 stories high, are mainly plain burnt brick structures, although some have delicately carved brick and stucco decoration. It is a city famous for its 86 mosques and its Grand Mosque, which, built by a companion of the Prophet, was the 5th in Islam. While the 3 cities are listed as threatened by UNESCO, the whole country is a cultural heritage site which must be defended and preserved.
Turning to health, the World Bank said that Yemen has made significant progress in combating 3 tropical diseases. The World Bank stated that Yemen has made progress in combating neglected tropical diseases. For his part, the representative of the World Health Organization in Yemen, Adham Rashad, considered that this progress is encouraging and is a sign of the possibility of eliminating one of the public health problems in Yemen in the next 5 years. The National Committee Against Coronavirus announced 9 new cases of the COVID-19 in 2 governorates. Committee officials said on Twitter that 7 cases were recorded in Aden and 2 in Hadramaut. Also, 2 recovered cases were recorded plus 5 deaths. With the current updates, the total confirmed cases are 10,056 including 1,962 deaths and 6,938 cases of recovery. Here is a reminder of the main headlines. International Migration Organization stresses warring parties should respect international law and protect civilians. In World Human Rights Day, war-torn Yemen suffer from endless humanitarian crimes. A new U.S. study confirms that the recent military escalation in Yemen undermines peace efforts. This is the end of the news. It was Roshan Fouad. Thank you for watching.